Around 252 million years ago, something happened to this planet that has never happened again, not before, not since, not even when the asteroid killed the dinosaurs. In the span of a geological blink, roughly 9 out of every 10 species on Earth simply died. The oceans turned acidic and ran out of oxygen. The land baked. Forests collapsed. Scientists call it the Great Dying, and for a long time, the most chilling part was that nobody could agree on what caused it. Something nearly ended complex life on Earth entirely, and we'll get to exactly what it was at the end of this video. But here's what most people never realize: this catastrophe didn't wipe out the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs didn't even exist yet. This destroyed an entire world that came before them, a world ruled by creatures so strange they look like evolution's first rough draft. Monsters with sails on their backs, predators with saber teeth 250 million years before the saber-toothed cat, and giants that look assembled from spare parts. This is the lost world before the dinosaurs. And almost none of it survived. Let me show you who ruled the Earth first. Let's start with the one you've definitely seen, and almost certainly misidentified. The Dimetrodon. That iconic creature with the huge sail on its back, the one sitting in every dinosaur toy set you ever owned. Here's the thing, it is not a dinosaur. It never was. Dimetrodon lived around 290 million years ago, that's roughly 40 million years before the first dinosaur ever existed. The gap between Dimetrodon and the first dinosaur is bigger than the gap between the first dinosaur and you. And it gets stranger. Dimetrodon isn't even closely related to dinosaurs or modern reptiles. It belongs to a group called synapsids, the same lineage that, hundreds of millions of years later, would eventually lead to mammals. Which means this sailback predator is, technically, closer to your family tree than it is to a Tyrannosaurus. You are more related to this thing than the dinosaurs were. The sail itself is still debated. The leading idea is temperature control, a huge surface area of skin stretched over long bony spines, used to soak up the morning sun and warm its body fast, so it could be up and hunting while its cold-blooded prey was still sluggish. Others think it was for display, to attract mates or intimidate rivals. Either way, it made Dimetrodon the apex predator of its world, armed with something genuinely advanced for the time, different kinds of teeth. Its name literally means 2 measures of teeth, sharp slicing teeth at the front, shearing teeth behind. While everything else had a mouthful of identical pegs, Dimetrodon had specialized cutlery. It was already eating like a mammal, tens of millions of years before mammals. But Dimetrodon was an early act. As the Permian wore on, the creatures got weirder, starting with one that looked like it was built backwards. Imagine an amphibian, something like a big salamander, about 3 feet long. Now imagine its head is shaped like a boomerang, a wide, flat, backward-pointing arrowhead, with the eyes sitting on top, staring straight up. That was Diplocaulus, and its skull is one of the strangest shapes evolution has ever produced. The head was so wide it almost looks like a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. There are 2 leading theories, and both are unsettling in their own way. The first, that wide, wing-shaped head acted like a hydrofoil. As water flowed over it, the head generated lift, letting Diplocaulus suddenly shoot upward off the riverbed to ambush prey above it, like a living underwater glider. The second theory is even more brutal in its logic. The head was simply too wide to swallow. A predator that grabbed Diplocaulus would find itself trying to gulp down something shaped like a boomerang, and would have to give up. Evolution may have built that ridiculous head purely so nothing could fit it down their throat. And Diplocaulus tells us something important about this lost world. It was wet, warm, and swampy, full of rivers and shallow lakes where amphibians thrived. The Permian wasn't all desert and volcanoes, at least not yet. It was a strange, humid greenhouse where creatures were experimenting with body plans that would never be tried again. The boomerang head was just one experiment. The next one was a creature that seems to have gotten its proportions horribly, hilariously wrong. Meet the most absurdly shaped animal of the entire Permian, Cotylorhynchus. Picture a body the size of a cow, a huge, bloated barrel, up to 20 feet long and weighing as much as 2 tons. And then, perched on the front of that enormous body, a head so small it looks like it belongs to a completely different animal. A tiny pinhead on a gigantic barrel. If you saw a reconstruction without context, you'd assume the artist made a mistake. But there's a reason for the ridiculous design. Cotylorhynchus was a plant eater, and that vast barrel-shaped body was essentially a giant fermentation tank. Permian plants were tough, fibrous, and hard to digest, so the strategy was simple: eat enormous quantities of low-quality vegetation and house a colossal gut to slowly break it all down. The tiny head didn't need to be big, it just needed to shovel plants in. The real work happened in that enormous belly. It's the same trick later used by some of the biggest dinosaurs: when your food is bad, get a bigger stomach. And here's the part that connects it to us again. Cotylorhynchus was also a synapsid, another distant cousin on the road to mammals. So this lost world wasn't ruled by reptiles at all. It was ruled by the strange early relatives of mammals, trying out body plans that ranged from sail-backed hunters to 2-ton barrels with pinhead skulls. The branch that led to you was running the planet, long before the dinosaurs took it away. But to survive in that world, some animals went the opposite direction: they built armor. As the Permian ground on, the climate turned harsher, drier, hotter, more brutal. And in what is now Russia, a tank evolved to survive it. Scutosaurus, the name means shield lizard, was a heavily built, armored plant eater about 10 feet long and weighing several hundred kilograms. Its body was covered in bony plates embedded in the skin, like a living suit of armor, and its skull was thick, knobbly, and studded with strange bony bumps and projections. Scutosaurus was built like a walking fortress for one reason: it lived in a dangerous neighborhood, and it couldn't run. With that heavy body and stocky legs, outrunning a predator was off the table. So instead it became too well defended to bother with. Thick armor, a tough hide, and sheer bulk meant that attacking a healthy adult Scutosaurus was a good way to break your teeth. It just stood there, ate low-growing plants, and dared anything to try. And we know exactly what it was afraid of, because we find Scutosaurus fossils in the same Permian Russian rocks as one specific, terrifying hunter, the apex predator we're building toward. The armored tank and the saber-toothed killer were locked in an arms race, right up until the end of the Permian, when both of them, and almost everything else, would vanish together. But before we meet that killer, there's one more creature so bizarre it barely looks real. If the Permian had a most alien-looking animal award, Estemmenosuchus would win it. It was big, around 10 feet long, heavily built, but the unforgettable part was its head. Sprouting from its skull were strange, fleshy, horn-like projections, fanning out sideways and upward like a bizarre bony crown. Nothing alive today has a head quite like it. It looks like something a child would invent and an adult would say that's too weird to be real. But those head ornaments tell a story. Unlike true horns built for combat, these projections were probably mainly for display, to show off to rivals and potential mates, the way a deer's antlers or a peacock's tail work. The bigger and more impressive your bony crown, the more dominant you appeared. Estemmenosuchus lived in herds, and in a herd, looking impressive matters. It was likely an omnivore, eating both plants and whatever small animals it could catch, a generalist surviving in an increasingly unstable world. And Estemmenosuchus belonged to a group called Dinocephalians, terrible heads, a whole family of large, bizarre Permian creatures that briefly flourished and then vanished. They were one of evolution's boldest experiments, and almost none of them left descendants. This is the recurring tragedy of the Permian. It was a world bursting with strange, ambitious life forms, nearly all of which led nowhere, because they were about to run straight into the worst day in the history of the planet. But first, the predator that sat on top of it all. This is the king of the lost world. Inostrancevia, the largest of the gorgonopsids, the apex predators of the late Permian. It grew up to around 11 or 12 feet long, with a powerful build, a massive skull, and the feature that should stop you cold, saber teeth. Long, curved, dagger-like canines protruding from its jaws. We tend to think of saber teeth as an Ice Age thing, the saber-toothed cat. But Inostrancevia had them first, by roughly 250 million years. A quarter of a billion years before Smilodon, this animal had already invented the saber-tooth. And here's the detail that ties this whole video together. Inostrancevia was a therapsid, a synapsid, a mammal relative. The single most fearsome predator of the pre-dinosaur world was, once again, a distant cousin of mammals. The lineage that would one day produce house cats and humans also produced the saber-toothed apex monster of the Permian. It hunted the armored Scutosaurus, the barrel-bodied herbivores, anything it could overpower, driving those saber canines into its prey and tearing it open. For its time, it was the most advanced killing machine alive, fast, powerful, and armed with weapons that wouldn't be reinvented for a quarter of a billion years. And then, at the height of its reign, with the armored tanks, the sailbacks long gone, the dinocephalians fading, and the gorgonopsids ruling the land, it all ended. Not slowly. Not gently. In what may have been the worst few thousand years this planet has ever endured. Which brings us back to the question from the very beginning. What killed 9 out of every 10 species on Earth? The answer is buried in Siberia. Around 252 million years ago, an enormous region of what is now Russia tore open and began to erupt, not a single volcano, but a vast zone of volcanic activity that poured out lava across an area the size of a continent, on and off, for hundreds of thousands of years. We call it the Siberian Traps. And it wasn't the lava that did the real damage. It was the gas. Those eruptions pumped staggering amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere, triggering runaway global warming. The planet heated up. The oceans absorbed the carbon and turned acidic, dissolving the shells of sea creatures. Warmer water holds less oxygen, so vast stretches of the ocean simply suffocated, became dead zones where almost nothing could breathe. On land, the heat and the collapse of plant life cascaded up the food chain. The sailbacks, the boomerang-heads, the armored tanks, the saber-toothed kings, one after another, they ran out of food, out of oxygen, out of time. Around 90% of all species on Earth were gone. Complex life came within a hair of ending completely. But not everything died. A few survivors crawled out of the ruins of that broken world, small, tough, unremarkable creatures that happened to make it through. And in the millions of years that followed, in the empty world the great dying left behind, those survivors diversified into something new. One branch of them would become the dinosaurs. Another, much later, would become mammals, and eventually, us. So the strangest truth of all is this: the dinosaurs didn't conquer the Earth. They inherited it, from a lost world of sail-backed, saber-toothed, barrel-bodied monsters that ruled first, and very nearly took all life down with them when they fell. So the next time you think of the age of monsters, remember that there was a whole world before the one you know, ruled not by reptiles but by the strange early cousins of mammals, full of sails and crowns and saber teeth and boomerang heads, and erased so completely by the great dying that most people don't even know it existed. The dinosaurs were the second act. This was the first. And it ended in fire. If you made it this far, you're exactly who this channel is for. Tell me in the comments which of these pre-dinosaur monsters surprised you most. I read every one. Subscribe, because we've barely scratched the surface of the prehistoric world. And there's another deep dive waiting for you on screen right now. I'll see you in the next one.